Deep breaths morning. For the first 40 years of my life, as people who knew me for a while can tell you, I was severely directionally challenged. Growing up, my parents and my siblings were always making me hold their hands so I would not wander off and get lost. I think it was because I had wandered off and gotten lost so many times. And in adulthood, I had several harrowing experiences of being totally lost and not being able to find my way. A large percentage of those happened when I was in a car by myself or with my children during the years we lived outside of Washington. Because we lived relatively close, 50 miles, we were in and out of that city all the time. So my children, my friends, and my husband have so many great, really embarrassing stories about my adventures while driving in D.C., and they just love to share those. But my love affair with Washington took an exciting uptick when I got totally lost on a day when a hurricane came up the coast and wreaked havoc on the Capitol. It was my first day working as a hospital chaplain at a hospital in Northwest D.C. I left my house that morning feeling very confident about getting in and out of the city. I was very confident because of a new service called MapQuest. It was a bona fide 1990s miracle. From your desktop computer, you could print exact turn-by-turn directions to and from your destination. I arrived at the hospital by 7 a.m. without problems, and I was so proud of myself. But I didn't know that the hurricane had come on land. So when I left at 3 p.m., all of the streets within a few blocks of the hospital were closed to the flooding. My printed MapQuest was utterly useless. Each time the police officers had me turn away from my route, I got further and further into the city and more lost. Thank goodness I did have a cell phone, and when I called my husband, who was in the middle of a meeting, he quickly told me, "Just go back the way you came, honey," before he hung up. I finally reached a dear, sweet friend who I worked with at another hospital, and she very patiently stayed with me on the phone, giving me up-to-date directions from MapQuest on her desktop computer until I finally saw the Washington Monument in the distance. That sweet, familiar landmark led me out of the city and put me on my way home. As much as I did love MapQuest, I ditched it pretty quickly when one of the greatest inventions in my lifetime appeared. GPS and my iPhone quickly became my very best friends. Jesus and his friends did not need a GPS to tell them how to get to Jerusalem. They knew the way. While there were 3 different routes from Nazareth to Jerusalem, on the day that Jesus made up his mind to take that perilous final journey, Jesus took the most direct route. But that route was a road that went straight through Samaria. The road through Samaria was the fastest, but it was usually avoided because of the deep hostility that existed between Samaritans and Jews. We do not have to guess how bad that hostility was because the scripture paints a very clear picture. Jesus' disciples let all of their learned prejudice and hatred for the Samaritans come to the forefront when they said to him, "Rabbi, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy all these people. It's not hard to see that the time and place where Jesus lived was deeply fractured, both religiously and politically. Jesus and his followers lived in a time of horrible repression under the Roman Empire. A well-grounded fear of the present and the future were constantly in the air they breathed. Even though the disciples were following one who had a very different message from the empire's message, the disciples were still victims of the realities of their time. So they somehow naturally concluded Jesus would want them to rain down fire on the people they had been taught to hate. From where we stand now, that seems like a ridiculous conclusion. It is absolutely unimaginable until we tune in to our daily news. No matter how we learn about what is happening in our world, we can quickly find ourselves shouting at any of our mobile devices or televisions or newspapers words that are not far off from what the disciples felt about the Samaritans. Of course, on our good days, we do not do that. We do our work, we love our families and friends, and we help everyone we possibly can. But sadly, we too have come to a place where we view life through a lens that quickly takes us to an us versus them reality. And I fear we do not know how to stop. Yet what we do know is that the healing of our world can no longer be a distant ideal. Together, though, we do know a way out of this hell. We must remember we are called to be light in a world that is turned upside down. The scripture tells us Jesus corrected his followers because the path they spoke of was not the path they needed to be on. There was a strict and sorrowful division between the Jews and the Samaritans, and healing that division was the desire of Jesus. One could hope that 2,000 years later, the world would have learned how to heal those divisions. And yet even now, when we check the news, our minds automatically began their duty of separating what is good and what is bad. Our minds automatically decide who is right and who is wrong, and who is us and who is them. We are all too ready to judge those on the other side for their transgressions. And we often even feel secret delight at their travails and missteps. Yet the mentality of us versus them is a slippery slope. A slope that eventually leads to hatred and discriminatory behaviors against those who we see as being against us and all we believe to be true. So while most of us do not spend a lot of our time thinking about who we want to rain fire down on, at least I hope we don't, we certainly do not have trouble passing judgment on them. The big question for all of us is, how do we separate what they are doing from the essential core of their God-given humanity? I wish I had the perfect answer. I wish I could say, I never do this. And I'm really sorry you all are having such a hard time with those horrible, awful, terrible people. But the reality is, those people and their actions are the bane of my existence. I suppose it might be hard to know what to do with true confessions of your minister on a Sunday morning. I do not have any great answers except to say, I know I cannot help anyone if I am harboring so much hatred in my own heart. While you all know I'm not really big on sin language, these days I keep remembering the saying of my childhood Sunday school teachers. Hate the sin, love the sinner. And I can still hear my mother's voice reminding me that with all I am doing to help people, it will not count if my heart is not right. One of my favorite priests, Henry Nouwen, who died long ago, once said, "Those who choose, even on a small scale, to love the world in the midst of hatred and fear are the people who offer true hope to our world." I want to be one of those people. And I want all of us to become the people Henry believed we would become. Some of you may not remember the beginnings of GPS, but the early models had a wonderful method for helping when we got off the path we were to follow. The kind voice would remind us they were recalculating or rerouting our journey. And instead of scolding us for a mistake, the device quietly mapped a new path from the current location to our destination. There was no judgment, but there were new instructions. At your earliest convenience, it would say, make a right turn and get back on the path to your destination. Who knew a GPS device could sound like God? I think that to find our way in these days, we will need to decide to become a people who are ready, willing, and able to be part of the solution. Right now, we need to begin healing the divisions in our world, in our nation, in our neighborhood, and in our families. To do this, we have to work together. We cannot do this on our own. We cannot just monitor ourselves and believe everything will change. We have to be accountable to each other about the state of our hearts. And we have to lovingly help each other to change directions. This is the way we can experience a new kind of freedom together. May it be so. May it be so for all of us.